Hey everyone, this is David Pike, the Motorcity Mechanic, and today I've teamed up with GenosGarage.com to bring you another video. Now today we're going to be talking about a common fuel leak you'll find on the 1998 1/2s up to 1999 Dodge Ram diesels. And the location of that fuel leak is at the fuel heater assembly on the fuel filter upper housing. And Geno's Garage offers 3 different things you can buy to fix that. And I'm going to show you what each one of those are. Now on the model years 1998 1/2 up to 1999, there was a common fuel leak. And the fuel leak was on the top of the assembly, right here in this location where the fuel heater wiring comes out. Now there's an O-ring in there we can actually replace. So in this video, I want to show you how to replace that O-ring. Also, I'm going to give you the option if you want to go ahead and do away with the fuel heater altogether. I want to show you how to install a block-off plug. And then also, if you want to go to the newest version of that fuel filter housing with the top load fuel filter, I want to show you the kit that Geno's offers as well. Now we're going to go from left to right and talk about each one of these items here. Now the first thing over here is just a simple O-ring. Now that's what we're going to be using from Geno's Garage if we're wanting to fix that leak and we want to keep our fuel heater intact. The second thing is what they used to offer. Now this was the plug that we would eliminate the fuel heater. This would go up into the bore where the connector come through as far as the wiring, and it used the original fasteners that the fuel heater plate was held on with. Now what they've done since then is gone over to a revised version. Now this revised version still uses the fuel heater plate to keep it in place. Big difference? Price. What used to be $55 is now $17. Now the first step in the procedure is we need to take the assembly off. Now this one's already off, so I can't show you step by step how to do that. But nonetheless, it's simple enough. You've got 2 bolts along the top that hold it attached to the engine, and you got your 2 fuel lines on the top, both the inlet and the outlet, and not to mention your 2 connectors. Once you get those taken off, it's just a matter of lifting it out of the vehicle, and then we can take it over to the workbench and start disassembling it. And the main thing we're going to do is we're going to back off that 14mm nut there. It's basically the same procedure as if you're replacing that cartridge on the inside. We're going to separate the upper half from the bottom half. So just back off on that nut right there, counterclockwise. Now the nut's going to stay attached to the upper assembly, so you don't have to worry about it coming off. It's part of it. Once we think we've got it all the way up, it's just a matter of lifting up. If you don't get it all the way, keep backing it off until you do. There you have it. Inside's where your fuel filter assembly is, so if you're going to be replacing that, it's just a matter of lifting up and inserting a new cartridge. But remember now, we're not really dealing with this. We're actually going to be dealing with this. This plate right here is part of the fuel heater assembly, and that's what we're going to be either eliminating or removing so that we can replace the O-ring or put the block-off plug in. Now depending on what we're going to be doing, if we're going to be replacing the O-ring, I'm going to show you how to disconnect the wires from the connector, because the connector is not going to fit through the opening when we try to push everything through the bottom. So what we're going to do is, instead of cutting the wiring like some people do, I'm going to show you how to back the wires out of the connector. We're going to slide it through, do the repair, pull it back through, and reinstall the wires into the connector so that we can reuse it and we don't have to do any soldering or splicing of the wires. Now if you're eliminating the operation of the fuel heater and we're putting that block-off plug in there, then yes, you can go ahead and cut the wires at this point so we can go ahead and push the wiring and the plate off of the assembly. But for now, I want to show you how to take the connector apart to get the wires out. Now there are terminal kits on the market that you can use to separate those pins from the connector. Now they look like different types of picks basically. They've all got different shapes. Some are pointed, some of them are a little flatter, some of them are a little more sharper edge. It really depends on what terminal you're trying to release. You can go through, if you got one of these kits, and use that, or if you're gentle enough, you can just use a straight pointed pick. Or if you're getting that 90-degree angle on here. Nonetheless, they all kind of serve the same purpose. One costs a little more versus a universal pick, so whatever works good for you. I'm going to go ahead and proceed with using the pick just to show you that you don't need a lot of expensive tools to do this. Now the reason why I'm spending so much time talking about the wiring is, the last thing I want to see is someone cut the wire, use little plastic butt connectors, or have to go back and solder everything, because then it looks like crap. Try to keep everything looking original as possible, and plus it doesn't take that much more time to actually separate the terminals from the connector. Now what we're going to do is start at the top. Now you see this orange piece right here. It's got 2 fingers on the back side. We're not going to be messing with those. We're actually going to be on this side. And what we've got to do is we've got to wedge something down between the gray portion of the connector and the orange piece. And there you have it. Now I can lift up and out. Those 2 fingers just guide it into the hole right here. That's all that's for. When you go back with it, it's the same procedure. You line them up down here and you squeeze in on it. Now looking down in the connector here, if you look on the left and the far right of where the terminals are, you'll see little black squares cut out. Inside there are plastic fingers that are part of this connector, and they lock onto the wires or the terminals. We're going to be putting our PIKE between the finger and the terminal, prying outward, and when we do, we should be able to pull or push the terminal back out the back side of the connector. So that's what we're going to be working on. I probably won't be able to show you with the light and the way the camera is, but when I put my PIKE in there, that's what I'm going to be working on. Now I'll show you once I get it out some of the items that's related to it as far as how it locks onto the terminal. Now when it comes to getting the terminal out of the connector, it takes a little force sometimes, or pressure on the back side. So what I like to do is grab a hold of the wire so that as I'm releasing the lock on the inside, so I got that one released, and because I had pressure on it, I was actually able to pull it out. Now we'll go on to the other side. Same procedure. And there we have it. Now if you look at the terminal right here, you'll see a square cutout. Now when you go back with this into that gray connector, make sure that that cutout is facing outward. This is where that plastic finger sits in that recessed area. That's what we put the PIKE in to try to pull away. Once we pull it away, we're able to pull the terminal out. And we go back in, and it slides in until it fully snaps in place. You may hear an audible noise, or you'll try to pull on the terminal to see if it's fully seated. Make sure it's locked in place, and make sure this is facing outward. Now that we got the wires removed from the gray connector, what we can do now is go ahead and take this assembly, rotate it upside down, and get to the fasteners that hold the fuel heater in place. Now the fuel heater assembly is attached to the upper assembly of a total of 3 T20 torque screws. And we're going to back them all the way out. We're going to keep them because we're going to be reusing them. Now what I'm using is just your typical T20 driver. You can use a different kind of setup with a bit and a socket. This works fine for me. It's quick and easy. Just go around here and back off all 3. And then we'll work on separating the plate from the upper assembly. Now that we got the fasteners taken off, what we can do is lay it on a workbench. We've got a little bit of space between where the fuel heater is and the workbench, so what we can do is we grab our T20 that we used earlier, sit it on top of where the wiring comes through, give it a gentle tap, and it'll push it through the upper assembly. At that point we can grab the fuel heater, we can pull it through. Remember, we didn't have to cut no wires. We're able to get the wires through. Everything's going to look stock when we get done with it. Now just get your PIKE and get up under one of the edges here and work that O-ring off. Now it may actually just cut itself coming off. If it's been on there a long time, it could be rock hard and just break. What we'll do is we could either cut it at this point and take it right off, or we can just lift it up off the harness. And we'll go back the same way with the replacement. But before we do that, we need to make sure we clean the area that the O-ring sat in, that little recessed area. Make sure it's all cleaned up, that way it actually sits in there properly. So at this point, we'll go ahead and grab that O-ring that we ordered from Gino's Garage. Just slide over the terminals and work it down the harness all the way to where it's supposed to seat on the portion that actually extends through the upper housing. Just sit it on there, work it around, make sure it's fully seated. Now what we'll do is we'll apply a little bit of grease around the perimeter so that when we go back inside that housing, we don't have any risks of tearing that new O-ring. Now all I'm doing is just adding a little bit of wheel bearing grease that I've got laying around. Just put a nice little coat around the outside edge. And now we're ready to put it back in the upper assembly. Now before we go reinstalling that fuel heater assembly back in the upper housing, what we need to do is make sure we clean the bore out right here that everything goes through. Get down in here a rag, make sure there's no dirt, no debris. If everything looks good, go ahead and stick your wires through. Line everything back up. Get it about in the right location and just squeeze up your fingers. That's all it takes. Now you got your wiring coming through. So all we got to do now is put the 3 T20s back in place. We can go ahead and grab our fuel filter lower portion and reattach it to the upper and tighten up that 14mm nut. Put the wires inside our gray connector and put it back on the vehicle. We've now fixed our leak that was caused by that leaky O-ring. Now if you're going with the option where you're replacing the actual fuel heater with a block-off plug, at this point we can go ahead and just cut the wires. We're not worried about taking them out of that connector so that we can fish them through, because we're just going to cut it off flush, and we've already got the fasteners taken loose on the bottom side, so once we cut that off we can just push it through. So just grab whatever you can, make clean cuts. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab our T20 that we used to take the fasteners loose, put it right here on top, and give it a gentle tap, and out it comes. So now you've got access to that fuel heater. Now what we're going to do is we're going to work on breaking that piece off. We don't need it anymore. It's got little plastic fingers attaching it to the back side. We'll work on that and also getting the wiring loose. Now for a quick recap, remember now we're going to be using that revised block-off plug that Geno's has now. We're going to insert it into the opening on the upper housing that this used to protrude through, that the wires came out of. We're going to take that off of the heater assembly, and we're going to use that heater assembly to sandwich this in place, that way it does not come out, and we'll reuse the T20 fasteners that held everything together. Now, we don't have to necessarily be careful with this as far as we don't want to warp the assembly or bend it all up, but as far as that black portion that we're taking loose, just pull on the fingers and start working it apart. Now all we got to do now is just cut the wire. And there we have it. We got our plate that we're going to be using to sandwich that plug in place. So all you're going to need to do is apply a little bit of grease to the O-rings. That way you don't have any kind of a chance of nicking the O-rings going in and helping aiding to install it. Put it in there and just press down until it's fully seated. Now that we got it fully seated, if you turn it right side up, you'll see that it sticks through the upper portion of that fuel filter assembly. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that plate that we took the black portion off, we're going to sit it on top. What we're going to do is we're going to install the 3 T20 torque screws back in place. So now that we've got that plug in place, what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and grab our fuel filter assembly, set the upper portion on the lower, and start tightening down that 14mm nut right there till it's fully seated. At this point, all we got to do is go ahead and take it back to the vehicle, mount it on the engine, and put our 2 fuel lines back on and go ahead and prime the system. Now, if you take your truck to your local Dodge dealership to have that fuel heater leak taken care of, what you're going to find out is they don't offer the O-ring, and they also don't sell the block-off plug. The only option you have is to replace the entire assembly. But the kicker is, they don't offer this assembly anymore. It's been revised to a newer version and it comes in a kit. Now the kit they're going to offer is well over $1,000. Let me show you what the alternative is to their kit that Geno's offers. So this is the revised assembly that replaces the older design. Now it looks identical to the kit that you would get through Mopar, but this is actually the kit that genosgarage.com offers. Now it includes everything from your water and fuel sensor to your fuel heater. It's got a top mounted fuel filter with the fuel filter inside. Also it comes with the needed rubber lines, sealing washers, and also the 2 connectors and pigtails so that you can make both these sensors and the heater work like they did on the original setup. Now when you're converting from the older style fuel filter housing to the newer kit, you're going to be relocating where the fuel lines are as far as where they come in and where they come out of. You will be reusing the banjo bolts that hold the fuel lines to the old assembly, and you're going to reposition them on the newer assembly. And we're going to be using the rubber hoses for that reason, because we're no longer coming in and exiting from the top. We've got different locations. We've got an inlet on the side and an exit on the bottom of this assembly. So that's the reason for the additional hoses and the reusing of these fittings. So I've given you a total of 3 options as far as how you can fix that fuel leak. Everything from the O-ring to the block-off plug to the replacement of the entire assembly. So let's go ahead and talk about part numbers and prices. If you decide to go with just the O-ring, part number is going to be GGFHORING. It's going to cost you right at $1. Now if you go with the fuel heater block-off plug, that part number is GGFHBO and it's $16.95. And if you opt to replace the entire assembly as the kit that Geno's offers, you're looking at $172.95. Part number is GGFC 98599. So there you have it. You got a total of 3 different ways you can fix that fuel leak. Each one of those items can be purchased from genosgarage.com. Make sure you go online, browse through their inventory, and also call them up and order a catalog. That way you've got something to thumb through when you've got free time. So at this point, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. Don't forget you can like me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you got any comments or suggestions about any of the repairs we did today, or anything Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, or Ram related, you can always email me at david@motorcitymechanic.com, and I try to get back to you in a timely manner. Once again, everybody, thanks for watching these videos, and I appreciate all the comments and feedback.